Hi there and welcome. My name is Michelle Fleming and I am a knowledge broker with the Ontario Centres for Learning, Research and Innovation in Long-Term Care at Bruyere, or the Ontario CLRI for short. Our session today is entitled Beyond Pride, Digging Deeper to Support 2SLGTBQI Older Adults. I'm really happy that you're joining us today. Before we begin, and in line with the Truth and Reconciliation Commission, in the spirit of reconciliation, we wanted to begin this presentation by acknowledging the land on which this session was organized. While we are gathered virtually, Bruyere is located on the traditional unceded territory of the Algonquin Anishinaabe people. The Algonquin people have lived on this land since time immemorial. We are grateful to have the opportunity to be present in this territory. Today, this place reminds us that our great standard of living is directly related to the resources and friendship of Indigenous peoples. As settlers, this recognition of the contributions and historic importance of Indigenous peoples must be clearly connected to our collective commitment to make the promise and challenge of truth and reconciliation real in our communities. So for anyone who's not aware, I wanted to just start off by telling you a little bit about the Ontario CLRI. The CLRI strengthens the quality of life and care for residents across the province. We are a program of the Ministry of Health and the Ministry of Long-Term Care, and we act as a resource for the sector to enhance the health and well-being of the people who live and work in long-term care. One of the primary initiatives that I am involved with the Ontario CLRI is our work around supporting diversity and inclusion. This work involves partnering with a number of different individuals and organizations, including people with lived experience. Today, I'm honored and delighted to be joined by Maxine Kossy from the Ottawa Senior Pride Network's Long-Term Care Committee.
Hi, I'm Maxine, and I'm a cisgendered queer woman, and I use the pronouns she, her. We hope today that through the sharing of my stories and the ideas that we share will help to inspire you as you move forward on your own journey in long-term care homes. Before I get into anything else, I do want to just address briefly the idea of language. So there is a huge long, and gets longer and longer every day, the acronym 2SLGBTQI plus. And within the community, we often hear people have appropriated the word queer, although the word queer has a lot of connotation, and certainly for a lot of seniors, represents a lot of past discrimination and slurs and things along that sort. However, there are people, the younger generation has sort of appropriated the word and referred to themselves as queer. And there are some seniors that do as well, I being one of them. And I want to just share briefly the little story of why I've come to accept that and say it's queer. I have a grandchild who is non-binary, and they use the pronouns they, them. And it has been a big shift and change for me. And whenever I've referred to the LGBT community or the 2S LGBT community or the 2S LGBTQI community, my grandchild has often looked at me and said, "Why do you have to have all those initials? Gramsy, there should just be one group for all of us. We're just all queer." And this is coming out of the mouth of somebody that was 11 years old. However, I do want, and I will, for the purposes of this talk, refer to the 2S LGBTQI plus community as queer. However, I do want to put a sort of a warning label on it, that there are a lot of seniors who do not accept this, and it is a reminder for them of the lived discrimination that they have faced and dealt with most of their life, and so that they are not willing to accept that wording of saying that they are. I've already alluded to, when we talk about language, another big piece is the use of pronouns. So I identify as a woman, and so I use the she, her pronoun. My grandchild, who doesn't identify as either male or female, they go by the pronoun they, them. And so again, the language has become quite important. And living in a heteronormative world, we just often look at a person, how they present physically, and we make assumptions about what pronoun to use. So I would encourage everybody to start thinking even how you introduce yourself can, and I'll speak later about this, can make people feel safer and have a little bit of feeling of where you're coming from and what you're acknowledging. But but just to be aware that people may use pronouns, and don't be afraid to ask, what pronoun do you use? When we're talking about language, it's important within our queer community even that language has been evolving and it changes. What was acceptable earlier is no longer acceptable now. How we refer to things, when people were thinking that they were being more open and more liberal-minded, they often started changing intake forms, for example, and they would say, you know, what was your sex, male, female, other. And within the queer community, that sense of other was never something that was really, it never felt good. And let's face it, you want to be the other. And what does that mean? And so those kinds of things, even the phrase, for a while, people would say, again, trying to be very more open and stuff, would say, oh, well, what's your preferred pronoun? One of my conversations with my grandchild, and I said something about what's your preferred pronoun, or I used that expression, and they turned to me and they said, it's not preferred, it is. And it really struck me how true it was. It's not about saying it's my preference, it is how I identify. And so again, just these little things, if today, during the course of my telling of stories, and when this video is over, and if you're left thinking about anything, to think about the kind of a language that you use, and to remind yourself that the language is evolving all the time. And also, sort of not a warning, but a precursor to say it's okay to make mistakes. I even make mistakes. Like for my grandchild, I knew them as a he for 7 years, 8 years, and so transitioning for me to start using they them pronouns hasn't always been easy, even for me, a member of the queer community, and I often make mistakes. And so when you do make mistakes, it just just say, oh, sorry, I forgot, and move on. What is important, as my grandchild points out to me, and says so openly, you can tell I have a very precocious grandchild. What they often say to me is, if you're going to say sorry, don't make it about yourself. Don't carry on and on about how you made a mistake and you're so sorry and you feel so terrible, blah, blah, blah. Just say, oops, sorry, and then move on. And the thing that every time I have made a mistake and went, oops, I did it again, they have always looked at me and in a very loving way said, it's okay. The important thing is you're trying. I can think back in my own personal journey and my own history to when it all began for me. I was in my mid-teens, and I remember so clearly my mother sharing with me a story of her friend's son who had gone to his mother and said to his mother that he was feeling quite confused because he found himself attracted to the boys in his class and not to the girls. His mother responded by saying that it was just a phase he was living through, that all boys or most boys go through that, and he should just ignore it, not act on it, definitely not act on it, and start dating girls, and he would see that those feelings, those strange feelings, would go away automatically. I remember so clearly, as if it was yesterday, my mother telling me that story about her friend's son and their conversation. And I remember sort of shrinking inside of me because I knew that I was attracted to the girls in my class. My mother had used the word that it was sick and that people needed to just ignore it and continue living their life as if that didn't happen. And that's what I did for a long time until I couldn't do it anymore. And I had to be true to myself. So my own personal journey in my life was definitely in initially just denying who I was, and then later on absolutely into hiding. Even once I came out to my family, there still were messages. We often in the queer community refer to the word pride and proud, and that wasn't a sense that I felt within my family. The messages that I continually got was that it was something that needed to be hidden. It was this big secret in the family that I was a homosexual and that I was a queer person. I'd like to share with you two stories that prompted the formation of the long-term care committee in the Ottawa Senior Pride Network. The first story, and I'm not going to be using real names, is the story of Steve, who was visiting his brother in a long-term care home. And one day while he was visiting, he saw two people walking down the hall, a man and a woman, and holding hands, an elderly man and a woman holding hands. And what Steve noticed was that as this couple were walking down the halls of the long-term care home, that the staff that they passed by were smiling at them and saying hi, of course. But as well, Steve overheard some staff saying, "Aren't they cute?" And when Steve came back to Ottawa from visiting his brother, he started thinking about what he had seen and what he had heard. And he had to ask the big important question: would the staff have had the same response if the couple had been two men or two women walking down the halls of the long-term care home holding hands? And unfortunately, the answer was probably not. And that was one of the reasons that prompted the formation of the long-term care, to look at that, to try to make long-term care homes more of a safer place for queer people to be able to age in. The other story, the second story, is the story that I often refer to, and people in OSPN often refer to as the guarding the door story. And again, I won't be using the real names. George and John were two men who had been in a relationship for a long time. George got very ill, and he had to be placed. Went to live in a long-term care facility. John would go and visit him and be with him mostly every day. But one of the things that John was fearful, and George was fearful, was of being found out about who they were, that they really weren't just friends, that they were gay. And so they asked their good friend, they asked their good friend Steve to come and visit them on an ongoing basis, perhaps daily if he could. And his job, Steve's job, was to simply stand at the door that was partially open, partially closed, while the two men could hold hands, that one partner could stroke the other partner's forehead, bend over and kiss them, and even at times crawl into bed and just hold each other close. And the guarder of the door responsibility was to stand at the doorway, so just outside of the room, so that he could see if any staff was coming down the hall. And both of those stories are stories that really hit deeply in terms of asking the question, or reminding us rather, of what is natural and spontaneous, and what should be natural and spontaneous, how it becomes a stressor in a person's life, and that your love and devotion and caring has to be scheduled in a certain way in order for it to be authentic and honest. So I won't go into my whole 14-year relationship and history with Rosa. However, I will talk very specifically to the last few years of our life together. So Rosa, in 2014, December of 2014, Rosa was diagnosed with ALS. And as you know, it was a devastating diagnosis for us. And we did make certain decisions right from the beginning. And one of them was that I would continue to care for Rosa, and we would continue to live in our own place, and that we would not entertain. Rosa absolutely did not want to entertain going into a long-term care. You might ask yourself why. Well, for all of the reasons that we've talked about so far, the fear of who we could be and how she could live her life for the last few years. And our own experience played out even though we weren't in a long-term care home, some of our fears and experiences definitely played out for us. For example, in the very, very beginning, people would often look at the two of us, and then health professionals would look at us and say, "Are you sisters? It's so nice to have your sister here with you." And they kept using the word sister. And that was actually something that was very comical for Rosa and I, because Rosa was Latina, her skin color was darker, her facial characteristics were very different, and I clearly am Caucasian. So There was huge difference between how we looked. Rosa spoke with a Spanish accent because she was from Chile. I did not. I mean, there were so many differences. So it was actually very comical to us when people would look at us and say, "Oh, is this your sister?" The other thing that we were, and when we said no, then the next line was always, "Well, then how nice that you have such a good friend that's here with you and coming to these appointments with you." And so again, it was a total reminder for us of how we live in a heteronormative society, and that nobody ever thought their first line to think that maybe we were partners. And the hard part was that many people, I shouldn't say nobody, but many people never even asked. They just made these assumptions and then proceeded to treat us based on those assumptions. Then it reached a point where we did have to have a personal support worker come into the home to help support Rosa, and that again posed another issue. So we had to ask ourselves questions because now we were letting somebody into our home. We started asking questions that many queer people, senior people in particular, end up asking themselves. What did we do with the symbols, pictures, etc., that are the books, all kinds of things that are in our home that might indicate that we were queer, that we were a same-sex couple? The decision that Rosa and I made was that we weren't going to change anything. So quite visible on a desk as people came into our apartment, they would see a gay flag sitting there on the desk. If they looked on our fridge, they saw a little sticker that was a rainbow sticker, and there were different signs. They saw pictures of Rosa and I together with our arms around each other, holding hands, and there was even a picture of Rosa and I giving each other a little kiss. And we made the decision not to take those things out of our home and to leave them there so that she could feel, as she was dying, as comfortable as possible and have her surroundings stay the same. And that was really important to us. We had only one personal support worker ever because we only accepted help, very limited help. That woman was a wonderful woman and she cared for Rosa, and I know she deeply cared for both Rosa and I actually. And we developed a good relationship, but she was never ever able to get her head around the fact that Rosa and I were anything more than friends. No matter how many times I told her, no matter how many times I tried to explain to her that our relationship was similar to the relationship that she might have to have with her husband, that it was a romantic relationship, et cetera, she continued until the very end saying how lucky Rosa was to have such a great friend like me. And so I think when I share these stories, it's not that I want anybody to ever feel sorry for us, but I think it's important for me to share these stories so that all of the professionals that hear this, that you can begin to think and to say to yourselves, we can do better. We can do better than this. People, when they're dealing with a loved one dying, shouldn't have to start thinking about all these kinds of things. And the not thinking about all these kinds of things became even clearer on Rosa's last day of her life. So she was slipping into consciousness, in and out of consciousness during those last 24 hours. And interestingly, the agency that was responsible for sending the PSW sent a brand new PSW to come to our home on that last day. And she was somebody I had never met before. She did not know me. She did not know Rosa. But clearly she had been told that she was being sent to a home where the person was in the final stages of dying. She arrived, I'm assuming she knew that, because she arrived with a Bible in her hand. She didn't ask if it would be comfortable. She went, I introduced myself, she introduced herself. We went into the room, into the bedroom where Rosa was lying, and she sat on a chair. I had a chair set up for her with her Bible, and she started opening up the Bible and started reading from it. Not aloud, but reading sort of quietly aloud. And I remember standing in the room and looking at her and thinking, I didn't undergo conversion therapy. Rosa had not undergone conversion therapy. Neither of us had hugely horrible experiences in our religious institutions. However, There are so many queer people that have. And this could have been a real struggle. It could have been a real trigger for a lot of post-traumatic stress for somebody. And you already are under a lot of stress when it's that last day of your loved one's life. I didn't have the heart to say to her, please put the Bible away. It didn't distress me personally too much. Rosa was more unconscious than conscious. She didn't even see what was happening at that point. Uh, and I felt it wasn't something I needed to make an issue with. But I didn't have a history of that kind of discrimination within my, a real overt discrimination in trying to convert. So I often think about that and those moments and think about how it would have affected somebody else. In addition to that, because she was brand new, I had to again come out to her and tell her of the kind of relationship I had with Rosa, because she too automatically said, are you a sister? Are you a friend, a good friend?" And I told her I was a partner. And I ended up also saying to her, and now when I think back, to be quite honest, I don't know where that courage came from inside of me, but I guess it was powered by the love that I had for Rosa and how I wanted those last hours to be for us and for her in particular. And so I ended up coming out to this strange woman, and saying to her that I was Rosa's partner. I tried to explain what that meant. And because often in the past people would say, "Oh, partners, like what business were you in together?" And I explained it to her. And I also explained to her that I was probably going to be sitting by Rosa's side, holding her hand, stroking her, bending over and kissing her, and that there would be times, because of what things that Rosa and I had talked about before she started becoming unconscious, that there would be times I would probably climb into bed with her and just hold her closely to me, so that she could feel comforted and know that she wasn't alone as she was dying. And the story always, I've told the story many times, and it always really hits me deep, because I keep thinking, if this was if we had been a straight, in quotation marks, couple, if we had been a heterosexual couple, there wouldn't have been a need at the last hours of your loved one's life to have that kind of a conversation. It would have just been accepted as normal. And I guess that when we look at 2SLGBTQI plus um, advocates and activism in our society right now, it's because that's all any of us ever really want. We want to make it normal, and that we're treated as quote unquote normal people. And I don't even like using the word normal. However, at this point, I just want to read you a little quote that I read somewhere recently, and it's really, really hit me before we go on with anything further. And that is that more than being accepted, more than being included, it's about belonging. And in particular, for queer people, seniors going into long-term care homes, I think that that's the underlying thing. They don't want to be tolerated. They don't want to be just accepted. They don't want to be included. They just want to feel that they belong.
I thank you for your strength and your willingness to be open and share this with all of us. I think your story brings up so many important points for people to consider and reflect on, because there is so much that we don't know about other people's journeys, and there is so much that we assume, and we do it oftentimes unintentionally, unknowingly even. And so I think it is important, when you are in your practice, to think about the story that Maxine has shared. And when you are engaging with people, particularly people that you're meeting for the first time, new residents who've moved in recently, their family members, their loved ones, their partners, whomever may be with them, think about the questions that you're asking, and remember these words that Maxine has just so bravely and kindly shared with us, because I think we all want to see a world that is better, and a long-term care sector that is friendlier, and safer for people to feel like they can be themselves, particularly because we know that this is quite often the final chapter in people's journey when they come into long-term care, and you only get that chance once. I imagine that upon hearing all of that Maxine has shared with us, that many of you, all of you perhaps, hopefully, are feeling like you want things to be different, and perhaps you're not sure exactly how or what that can look like. So we wanted to next explore with you some practical things that can be done to help someone who is 2SLGBTQ to feel more comfortable.
Just take time to get to know the person, find out who they are, find out what their life is like. Secondly, ask questions. Don't be afraid to ask questions. Ask direct questions. Ask who's significant in your life. Who are the people that care for you? Who are the people that support you? Who are these people? If you see pictures, ask who are in the pictures. Ask to be in a sense to be introduced to the people in the picture. Ask the questions and don't be worried about the questions. People will answer them the way they feel the most comfortable. But just asking makes a person feel that it might be a little bit safer because you're not afraid to ask the question. How you introduce yourself is really important. Your name badge. When I go into a place of any kind of place, and I see that the name badge says, "Hi, my name is so and so," and I use the pronouns so and so and so and so, it automatically gives me a certain message. So something very simple as that. If I see somebody has an ally pin around their lanyard, if I see a clipboard and there's a little rainbow sticker, or if there are rainbow stickers in the doorways, those are symbols to me and signals to me and to other queer people that this is perhaps a safe place. Doesn't always mean it is, because we're still dealing with people's beliefs and values, but it at least a signal that there might be an openness and it might be a safer place. And lastly, don't make assumptions. Please don't make assumptions that partners are sisters, friends. Please don't make assumptions that everybody you meet is a heterosexual.
So to close us off today, I wanted to share with you that the Ontario CLRI has a number of resources that are available to help you to support your journey towards inclusion, and they're all available free of charge. We would encourage you to explore our recently launched toolkit entitled Embracing Diversity, a Toolkit to Support Inclusion in Long-Term Care. This toolkit was developed with our Provincial Supporting Diversity and Inclusion Advisory Group, which includes people who work in long-term care, researchers, sector partner organizations, as well as individuals with lived experience, including residents in long-term care. The assessment tool lets you review promising practices across 7 impact areas. And we actually have a webinar recording where we go in detail over each of those 7 impact areas and give you some suggested promising practices that you can consider implementing. The toolkit also includes some personal reflection questions that can help you to deepen your own understanding of equity and inclusion, as well as some group learning activities and a series of posters. For example, the What Would You Do poster activity was created to spark conversation following reflection on a series of illustrations that depict microaggressions that can commonly occur in long-term care homes. We also have a resource card on our website where we have compiled some resources that can specifically help regarding supporting the LGBTQ community. So I would encourage you to explore that link on our website. So thank you so much for listening to our session today. Hopefully you have found it helpful. I would also encourage you to explore the Ontario CLRI's diversity and inclusion resources, as well as some of the other resources that our team has available that are all free to you at our virtual booth here at the conference. So thanks so much for participating, and thank you for being allies. And we look forward to hearing about your stories of how you have used what you've learned today to help improve the lives of the residents and families and team members at your home.